We got some mic going. Good morning, everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful convergence so far, and welcome to the last day. My name is Christy Weekly, and I'm a program manager out of the Fargo office, and I concentrate on the financial aspects of AX. And today we're going to focus on the invoice to cash scenario, and a little bit about what you'll see today will be in the core 2012 product, and then there's going to be some additional features that I'll go through that were added in the CU6 and the CU7 time frame. So I'll make sure to kind of call those out as we go through those different demos. So today what we're going to take a look at, of course, is our first disclaimer slide, right? Everyone has that for R3. We're going to just go through a few scenarios around the free text invoice templates that were introduced on 2012 RTM. We're going to go through some new email reporting options that we have available. And what I'll show you today, we're going to go through an AR, but this is also available on the AP side, so you'll probably see it later too, maybe a little bit in the procure to pay session this afternoon. We're also going to look at some correction capability on the free text invoices. We're going to take a look at the single euro payment area, also known as SEPA. And I know it might not be real relevant to everyone in the audience, but I know there are a lot of US customers that of course do business with customers in Europe, and this may impact you. We're going to take a look at some of the settlement enhancements that we have, and then we'll lastly go into the collections process. So we are pretty much going to do all demos today, so we're just going to jump right into AX. As I go through, please feel free to ask questions. You're going to have to talk pretty loud. I'll make sure to repeat the question, or you can go to a mic if you want. If we do start to run a little bit long, though, I may just have you hold your question until the end, but please feel free to interact as I go through the demo. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start in AX, and I decided to actually show you a picture of my snowblower. It's been a really bad winter for a lot of us, and especially here in Atlanta, you hear about all the ice and the snow and things are shut down, and I've decided to expand my business. I have a business called Christie's Lawn and Garden, and I've decided to expand that to also snow removal. Very common thing, obviously, in Fargo. We haven't actually had too much snow this year. But I do want to offer this new service to my customers. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up a new template for my free text invoices that I use to bill them for my snow removal services. So you can see here I already have a few templates defined for my flowering that I provide, for my grass cutting that I provide, and I've added a new template here for my snow removal. And really what the free text invoice template allows you to do is just basically to create a recurring invoice through the free text invoice. And you can see here that I've defined my lines at the bottom, and on all of my invoices I'm going to charge for snowblower services, for some shoveling services, and of course you have to have salt because you know ice is really bad, you need salt on those surfaces, and of course I need some gas for my snowblower. So all of my customers that are going to sign up for my services will be charged for these basic things. You can add as little or as much as you want onto these templates as you create them for the free text invoice. And of course, I can always make edits to these templates once they become an actual invoice for each of my customers. Actually, one thing I did forget to show here is I've already got this template assigned to a few customers. So I'm just going to show you here. Oh, gotta get onto the right snowblowing services here. You can see here that I've already sold this service to a couple customers, that I'm just going to start with my snowblowing service. And what I'm going to do is go and add this to a new customer called Alpine Ski House. So I've convinced them that it'd be a really good business move for me to come in and push a huge pile of snow to one end so that their customers could actually try out their skis in their parking lot. So that's what the service is that I'm going to do for Alpine Ski House. And I'll go to my invoice tab, and here is my setup for recurring invoices. You can see here you can add as many templates to the customer as you want. So maybe I do provide them also some grass cutting services in the summer. I could also add them as a template. We're just going to choose instead our snow removal services. And let's say we're going to start this on the 24th. And they only are going to use my services through March 24th. So 3 months. So some important things when you define the setup of the recurring invoice on your customer is you do need to say also whether you want the default values to come from the template or from the customer. Now, don't think of this setting for the lines. You're always going to get the lines from the template. But what this is asking is, do you want things such as the tax codes or the tax groups to default from the customer? So some important things like their payment terms, their method of payment, things like that. So you probably do want to set that to customer account. And then the last thing I want to define is my recurrence pattern. And I'm going to choose to bill them every 2 weeks for my services. So regardless of how many times it snows, they're going to get a bill every 2 weeks. Hopefully it doesn't snow anymore, so I get some revenue without doing a lot of work, right? Okay, so we've defined the recurring invoice on the customer. And remember, I had it also assigned to 2 other customers. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump in and run a periodic process. And here's my process that I'm going to choose to run. And let's say that today is the 27th. And I'm going to choose the specific template that I want to create my invoices for. And if I want to, I could restrict it further to a specific customer. If I don't do that, though, basically the system is just going to go out and evaluate all the customers the template's assigned to and go ahead and create the invoice. And it is smart enough, of course, to understand to only create it every 2 weeks. So if I ran this tomorrow again, it would not create the invoices again because it's not 2 weeks out into the future. Okay, so we have our recurring invoices created. And the number you saw in that little message was actually talking about what I would call a batch. It's really batching or grouping together the customer's invoices that were created as a result of the process that I just ran. So here's my recurrence ID. And then if I click on lines, you can see here is my list of all of my invoices / customers for whom the invoice was automatically created from the template. So if I want to take a look, let's maybe go into Alpine Ski House, my new customer. And I can look at the details. This actually opens up the free text invoice for you. If you notice, I go into read-only mode when I'm doing this because it might be just a scenario that I just need to do validation. And we want to make sure that the user doesn't accidentally change something as they're doing the validation on the document. Of course, I can always go into edit mode. I can always make some changes to this. So let's say that this customer decided to also have me come and actually blow some snow away from their house. So maybe I'll charge them a little bit more for just this one time. You can see I'm making any edits to this. I can come in here and let's just say I'm going to split part of this for a home. 25% of that will be for their home, and the other 75% we're actually going to change to business. You can see this is a new feature that was introduced in 2012 RTM. This is called accounting distributions. And really what this allows me to do is to split the revenue across multiple departments without having to actually create multiple lines on my invoice. In 2009 and earlier, you would have had to actually create a separate line in order to split that revenue across my 2 different departments. And of course, I could add additional dimensions in if they're relevant, or I can choose to leave them blank. Also important to notice is that the tax will also follow the split. Now in this example, my tax is going to a balance sheet account, and my account structure is set up to not require additional dimensions. But you'll see here it'll still split it to match if there were dimensions, but then it will just get summarized when it goes into GL. Right, one other thing before we go and post this is we also added an additional feature called subledger journals. And what this gives you is the ability to preview your accounting entry prior to posting. So what we saw in the distributions was really more on the operational side, where you could actually define the split of the dimensions across, or the split of your revenue across dimensions. Here, though, we're also seeing the full debit and credit information. You notice in the other window, no debits, no credits. I don't really care about that in that window. But here is an accountant coming in and validating this information. I can see all of my information for my tax and also the accounts receivable account that will be updated and the appropriate revenue accounts. Okay, so from here, let's go ahead and go back to our batch of documents. So one thing to keep in mind when you create your recurring invoices is you do need to post them from this periodic window. You might have noticed in my previous window the post button was disabled. So what we can do here, we have similar options to what we have in journals. You can post, you can validate, you can do the post and transfer. So if there is a document with an error, you could post the ones that are valid and then keep the one with the error and fix that. So we'll go ahead and post all these. And this does go through the batch, so it'll probably take just a few seconds here. We get a little message that it was successful. Up a little bit. There we go. And if we'll just take a look at our free text invoice list page, just to point out here, let's see if I can make this a little. Sorry, the resolution is not the best here. I'll scroll over. You can see here that we also do show that recurrence or batch ID in the list, so you can actually see the documents that were created and posted together. Okay, so that is a quick demo of our capability around the templates. Just a couple things to keep in mind. Again, this was introduced in 2012 RTM. A lot of questions that we get often is, well, what about the sales order? What about the customer invoice that I create from sales order? We do not have this capability yet on the sales order side. Right now it is currently only on the free text invoice. That's a pretty common question. Also, another question we get a lot is around the accounting distributions and that ability to view the accounting in the subledger journal prior to posting. That was also only introduced into the free text invoice. That is also something that will hopefully be coming in an upcoming release around the sales orders customer invoice that we also have. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the correction capability, and we're also going to take a look at some reporting enhancements that were made specifically around emailing documents to your customers and or vendors or even internally. And once again, we're going to jump back into AX. Right, we can see everything here good. So let's take a look here at the correction capability. I do want to point out that the ability to do corrections is controlled by a configuration key. I just want to point that out here. The right place license. So if you do want the ability to do corrections, you need to enable this option in the license configuration. And also keep in mind that once you do that, it will only be used for transactions created from that point going forward. So all of your historical transactions cannot be corrected. It would only be new ones. Okay, so let's take a look, and we're going to go into our free text invoice. And I'm going to take a look again at this Alpine Ski House invoice that I just created. So again, using our template, you can see that everything posted correctly, and it defaulted in for the template. So we need to correct it, though. There was maybe something incorrect. I probably undercharged them. I know maybe a customer probably wouldn't tell us that, right? But let's go ahead and do a correction. And we're going to say that there was an error on here. And I'll accept all of my default. And you can see here now that I'm in the context of a new free text invoice. You'll see the text at the top telling me that I am now correcting it. So what the system did is it actually created a copy of the free text invoice, which is what I'm seeing on the screen here now. I can go ahead and make my edits. So let's say that because I added their home in my services, I'm going to make this 2 hours instead of 1 hour. Right? And I can make a lot of other edits if the due date's wrong. The only thing you really can't do the correction on right now is the customer. So if you do need to actually change it to a different customer, you will have to reverse it out and then just create the invoice again. All right, so we have everything we need. Let's go ahead and post this. I'll choose to not print the invoice right now. Okay, and important things to note here in the info log. What the system is doing under the covers is it's actually creating 2 new documents. It's creating, first of all, a credit memo to reverse out the original document, and then it's creating the new free text invoice with the correcting information that I just defined. Some other important things is if there was settlement already done from a payment against this invoice, it will actually take the settlement record and transfer it from the original invoice to the new corrected invoice. Some other things, if there was interest calculated on this invoice that was corrected, it will actually reverse out the interest to make sure you're starting clean with this new invoice that was just corrected. Okay, now what I want to do, so I've already sent these invoices, this credit memo, but Alpine Ski actually would really like a statement, just kind of giving a nice recap about what happened here. So we're going to go and we're going to generate our customer account statement. And you can see here I did restrict it to just this one customer for right now. I put in a date of the 30th. But here's the new functionality that we introduced around emailing capability. So we have a lot of customers that, of course, want to email statements to your customers. And today what you had to do is you actually had to go into print management and you had to actually create a separate record for every customer with their email address, which, yes, was a major pain, right? So what we've done is we've actually introduced a new option under the email where you can go in and you can choose a specific purpose for the customer. And let's say that I choose business. And I could also choose primary. And what the system will do now is it will basically say every customer included in this range, go out to their customer record, actually pull the existing email address that's either attached to their business or their primary purpose and send the email that way. So if I was sending this to every single one of my customers, it would go to every single customer, pull their email automatically that's already there on the customer contact, and it will generate a separate email for each customer. You no longer have to go into print management and create those separate records for each of your customers. So I'm actually going to choose just my primary because I know that's where my email address is attached. And I'll say OK. And the two little @ signs is the representation for primary for the address. Notice, though, you can add additional addresses in here. So if you want to email this to someone else, you can also do that. One other thing, too, I should have pointed out here is if you do want to email this to someone internally in your company, maybe like a collections manager, if you want to also give this information to them, that's what the worker title is. So the customer purpose is external facing, the worker title is internal facing. So this is going to take all of your workers and take a look at who's ever assigned the titles that you've selected for email, and it will, again, take their existing email address and send the document also to them. Okay, so I have my primary defined there. So I'm going to go ahead and choose OK, and this will take a little while. And I actually have this defined to go to my email address, so hopefully I don't have any bad emails popping up, right? Let's choose OK to generate the report. Okay, it says it was successfully sent. While this is chugging and going through and coming to my email, I just wanted to show you quickly where on the customer this information is pulling from. So this was Alpine Ski. I'll go in and choose to edit the customer. And from here is our contact information, you can see. And we have a type that we've defined for the email address. Right here is the email. And here's where it's pulling the primary setting from. If you go into advanced, you can also see the additional purposes that you could choose. So this was the other options that you saw in that dropdown. So if you have a different email for business, maybe that's where you send their statements, you could choose that also. That's where it's coming from, and let's just quickly take a look here at email, and there we have our statement. Take a look, open it up quick, and there's my statement that was emailed to me. So just a reminder, this was introduced, no longer need my snowblower. This was introduced for not just accounts receivable. You also have these capabilities on the accounts payable side, and actually I think probably even GL, pretty much all of your financial reports. And also just to kind of reiterate, again, you can go and you can do any report basically. So if I want to send my internal account statement to someone internally, we have the exact same options where we can go to the destination, email, and from here, notice here, we recognize that this is internal only report, so now my options for my customers are removed. Okay. So we've taken a look at corrections, we've taken a look at the new reporting enhancements. So again, a few reminders. Correction capability for the free text invoice, you do need to turn that on through the license configuration. Again, another question, is this available in sales order invoices? It is not today. We actually did a lot of work, as you can see, around the free text invoice for service/public sector in 2012. So that's why a lot of what we're showing today is just available on the free text side and not the customer invoice yet. Okay, so we're going to keep going. So I've sent my customer his statement. We're all good on that aspect. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the SEPA functionality that was introduced. And this actually came in, I'm trying to remember, I think it was, actually I have a slide later, I think it was in CU7 that it came in. But also keep in mind the SEPA functionality you can also get through a hotfix on 2009 and also on AX4. I believe AX4 it's Service Pack 2 and 2009 I believe it's Service Pack 1. But again, go out to Partner Source, Customer Source, and you can find that information for SEPA. So we'll take a look at setting up the mandates. We'll go ahead and actually create a mandate for one of our customers. We'll go ahead and actually do an invoice. And then after we're done with that, we'll go and create the payment. And then we'll take a look at a few of the settlement function or features that were introduced also. So we're going to jump back into AX. So this is a new customer that I have. Sure. No, so SEPA was introduced in CU7, which is already released. Yep, so the question was specifically, I keep saying it was introduced, was it in R3 was the question, and SEPA was introduced into AX through the CU7 roll-up, cumulative roll-up. Okay, so we have our customer catalog store. And they are actually a customer of ours that we're going to do a direct debit. And they're located, though, in Europe. And SEPA is really a new requirement for European customers, where if you do need to do a pull of funds out of their account, you can use a direct debit, and that requires a mandate where the customer has actually authorized the pulling of the funds. It also has to be done in the euro currency. So again, for some of you, this may or may not be too relevant, but keep in mind the basic format or the framework that's in place for SEPA really could be used by any customer that needs to do a direct debit type feature or functionality to their customers, even in the US. You may need to make a few little tweaks like onto the report, the mandate report, and things like that, but it really is a core framework you could use for any type of direct debit. So we're going to take a look at the setup before we define it on the customer. The first thing we're going to take a look at is parameters. There are some new parameters introduced specifically for direct debit. And here we have some defaults. These are only defaults. So when we actually go to the customer account itself and we actually create the mandate on the customer, we can override all of these defaults at that point in time too. So the first thing you can do is you can define the days required for either one pre-notification or for a recurring. So maybe there is a service that you provide for them every month, and every month you pull funds out of their account. So this is basically saying the number of days from the invoice to when we expect to actually pull the funds out of their account as a default. And then we also have the days required for the first or recurring for the different types of SEPA requirements that we have. So the days required for the bank submission, this is basically the number of days required for you to get the information to the bank in order for them to pull the funds out in time out of the customer's account. So this might take just one day once you actually get all of your mandates, your connection to the bank, your files and everything properly defined. When you first start actually defining the SEPA information, it might take maybe 2 days just to make sure that all of your information is defined properly. And then the last option we have is an expiration. And this basically says if I have a mandate assigned to the customer, after how many months will that mandate actually become inactive if I no longer pull funds out of the account of the customer? So if I define this as 3 months and I never do a direct debit out of the customer's account for 3 months, that mandate goes inactive. If I do pull funds out of their account, though, this 3 months would just get pushed out every time I actually create a new pull of funds from the customer's account. And of course, there's a number sequence you need to set up, kind of along the similar lines of what you normally would do. The last thing, though, we have to really think about for the setup is the method of payment. And you can see here I created a new method of payment specifically for this customer called direct debit. Just move this over so we can see a little bit better. The key setting that we need to define here is this option here to require the mandate. And when you actually have the invoice, and on the invoice, if the method of payment defaults to direct debit, the invoice will recognize that the funds will be pulled from the customer's account for this specific invoice. And why that's important is because we'll actually see on the invoice itself, it prints the pre-notification so that the user or the customer actually knows when the funds are going to be pulled from their account right on the invoice. Okay, so we're going to define that. The rest of the method of payment setup is pretty much the same as what you're used to. If you're doing any type of EFT or direct debit type settings, you would of course still define the file, the XSLT, and through AIF and all that information. So that is pretty much standard still with what you're used to. Okay, let's go back to our customer now. And I'm going to set up for catalog store. Go in and choose to edit. And a couple things we'll just take a look at. The first thing is on the customer, you do need to define the bank account. And of course, you probably are pretty used to this. The one thing specific with SEPA though, is you do need to have a SWIFT code and an IBAN on the customer's bank account. So again, this is probably something not quite so relevant for the US. So again, it might require a little tweaking. But these are the two pieces of information required there. Next, we're going to go down to our payment default. And here, my method of payment is defined as my direct debit method of payment that I just defined. So we're good with that setup. And the last thing we're going to look at is the actual fast tab for the direct debit mandate. You can see here right now, this is a new customer. I have no mandates defined for them. So I'm going to choose to add one. And you can see the mandate defaulted in from the template or the number sequence that was defined on the parameters. You can see we're in an incomplete state, which just basically means we're in the process of setting this up. Here's the bank account from the customer. And here's the customer's address that we defined. For SEPA, you have a couple different options for the schema. You can choose score, B2B, or the core one. You can choose the frequency. Is this a one-time or a recurring direct debit for this customer? And we'll leave it a recurring. Here are our defaults that we saw in the parameters. If I want to override them, I can. I'll just choose to leave the defaults for right now. Now, the important thing to actually activate the mandate is to get a signature from the customer. So typically what you would do is you would go ahead, just leave everything the way it defaulted here. Just close that. And back on the Fast tab, I have an option to print the mandate report. So I'm going to go ahead and just print this out to the screen so you can see what it looks like. This will just have the basic customer information. This contains all the wording that's required from SEPA for the customer. You can see all the address information defaulted, our address information. And the important thing is you need to get their signature, the location of where they were when they signed it, and then of course the date of when they signed it. So once you get this mandate back from the customer, close here, and you can choose to attach that mandate. So we do have document handling, so I could come in here, attach the mandate that was returned to me from the customer, and then I'm going to go back into my mandate and choose to edit. And let's just say they just sent this to me. Say yes on that. We'll say find it in Germany. Okay, and you can see now what happened is my expiration date automatically updated because now I'm actually in a new state. I'm ready to actually start using this mandate. And that date will just get adjusted continuously as we go through the process of actually creating new documents. So a couple of the things we can do in this window. We can also print a notification report. I'll just show this right now. We'll come back to this after we do an invoice, just to show you. Right now it's blank. And really what this is it's just a list of open or unpaid customers' invoices specifically for this customer. So if they do call you up and they want a list of the invoices that you're going to be pulling funds for, you can go in and generate this report. We'll close that, and let's go and create a free text invoice now. A new one, and this was for Catalog Store is our customer. And they're gonna buy some seeds from us. I'll choose my revenue account. And let's say that they're buying 500 euro worth. Okay, so we have basic invoice put in. Let's take a look at the header. The important things on the header, again, method of payment. That's the key to the system recognizing that the funds will be pulled out of this customer's account. Because the method of payment is defined to require a mandate, you can see the mandate also defaulted here on the window. If the customer does have more than one mandate, you do have the capability to click the drop down and go ahead and choose a different mandate if you want to actually pull it out of a different bank account. Maybe the customer told you to pull funds from somewhere else. We'll leave that as a default. And from here, we're ready to post. And let's also print out the invoice and take a look at what that looks like. Green. So the pre-notification information you can see located at the bottom of the invoice. This will work on also sales order invoices, I believe even the project invoices. So basically, as long as that method of payment is defined there and you print the invoice out, you can see the appropriate mandate information. Based on the information that was defined, it'll also show you the date that we are expecting to pull the funds from this customer's account, which is a key piece of information for the pre-notification. So once we have the invoice, let's just quickly jump back to that customer's account. And I'll just show you once again that report, the transaction report, and just show our free text invoice will now be on there if we take a look at the notification. There's our free text invoice. And again, key thing to remember, once the invoice is paid, it will drop off this report. This is only open invoices that are remaining to be paid. All right, so we have our customer's invoice. We have all the information on the method of payment ready. So let's go ahead and create a payment now for this customer. We'll choose, what happened there? Our Catalog Store is our customer. So before we actually go and choose the invoice, I'm just going to show you also a couple settlement features that were introduced as part of 2012 RTM. So we're going to just leave this open. We'll minimize it. And let's jump into accounts receivable parameters. And if we go to the settlement option here, a couple new things that were introduced. First of all is this mark lines on free text invoice and interest notes. This option gives you the capability to actually do settlement or payment down to the line level of your document. So if you do have specific documents where the customer is it's very important to them to pay a specific line, you can actually go in the settlement window, and there's an option I'll show you in just a second where you can go and see the invoice lines, and you can actually choose to settle a specific line or a specific amount on a line even. Once again, only on the free text invoice, as you can see by the option here, and you do need to enable this before entering your invoices. So existing invoices that are in the system that have not been settled will not have this option enabled, because there is some additional data that needs to be populated in a table in order for this to work. That was one new thing introduced for settlement. The other thing that was introduced was the settlement priority. So what this allows you to do is to define your own priority for how payments will be settled against invoices. Today, of course, there's some algorithm, in the system, but this basically gives you that flexibility to define it the way you want it to be. So you can see here we automatically settle here by voucher, but I'm going to choose to also settle first by due date, and I'm going to move that up to the top. You can see here you can either settle ascending or descending on the due date. And you can also choose to settle on the cash discount date. So I'll move that up also. I also do want the amount, that to descending order. Close out of there. So the one thing with the priority is you can choose to use this with or without the automatic settlement option also. So if you don't do automatic settlement, you can still use the priority. In the settlement window, I'll show you in just a minute, there's a new button at the top that basically says mark by priority. And the system will then come in and use the definition that you've defined here in the parameters for the order of how those documents will be settled. Or if you choose to use automatic settlements, you can also tell the system when it's automatically settling, follow my priority. So a few different options there. And those were introduced in 2012 RTM options. Okay, so let's jump back to our payment journal. We're going to take a look at the settlement window. So if I choose to mark this, a couple things that we talked about here. Okay, here's our mark by priority option. Thing off, my mark lines should be available here. Did I actually mark something? Parameter. Jump back there quick and I didn't screw up my settings here. Okay, have that marked. There we go. Back, re-add my line. Catalog store, we'll go back into functions, settlement. Mark that. What's going on if I'm not marking, but so from here, again, you could see my mark priority went away because I had marked it in my settlement. I'm not sure what's going on. This is R3. This is not released code yet, so I'll have to take a look at this when I get back to the office. But I should be able to go into my mark lines options, and what that will do is it actually will show me, oh, I don't know why. I only put one line on my free text invoice. That's right. Didn't get my demo quite right. So this is a good example. Yeah, I only had one line on my free text invoice, so that was why. The other thing, too, is if this is a sales order invoice, keep in mind this button will also be disabled. So from here, go ahead and close out of that. And from here, just creating the payment would be just like normal, where I could go ahead and actually generate the file. We're not going to take the time just for sake of time here in the demo. But from this point on, for the SEPA and for the direct debit, you just basically follow your normal path for creating your payment. All right, let's quickly take a look here. So we've gone through the SEPA setup. We've gone through some of the settlement changes that we have. The last thing we're going to take a look at is the collections functionality that was introduced. And the one thing I actually did forget to ask at the beginning is how many are using AX 2012? Okay, so quite a few. Is anyone actually using the collections functionality yet? You? Okay, good. We'll take a look at some additional setup options. We'll take a look at the collections list page and the collections detail page. So under our setup, let's first take a look at our aging period definition. The one thing that we introduced here in 2012 RTM was the new aging indicators. And we'll see here in just a little bit where this is used. It really just gives you a quick at-a-glance view at your customers just to see whether the customer is actually past due or not with their invoices that we have in the system. So we'll see that on the collections list page and detail page. Some other things that we introduced are, first of all, the customer pools. This is just a group of customers, is really all that it is. Some people find it interesting that we use the word pools. So this just gives you the ability to go in and define a query for different ways how to group together your customers. It's pretty common in the collections scenarios in different companies we've talked with where they have one collector responsible for customers like A through M, and then another collector responsible for N through Z. You can define your pools however you'd like. You can see here that I have one for just customers that are 180 days or over. Of course, you would have some additional ones defined here if you wanted, again, based on however your customer or collections agents are assigned to your customers. With the pools, the next thing you can do is take a look at the collection agents. So we have a couple agents here, and you can see right now they're not assigned to any pools, but I could go ahead and let's say that add a pool here to Arnie. You can see that, and of course we'll just say that this is his default. There we go. So when we go into the collections list page, that he'll be able to see this pool. Out of there. And the last thing I just want to show in the setup is around the customer aging. We did add a new customer aging snapshot that does need to be run when you are actually printing or looking at the aging information for your customer. Keep in mind that this snapshot will also automatically be run when you print your aging report. And you'll see here when we get to the collections window, you can also trigger this to actually run for specific customers that you're looking at. But I've already gone and actually updated my aging snapshot, so we'll cancel here. And now we're going to take a look at collections. And the first thing we're going to look at is the collections list page. And this is simply a list of all of your customers in the system, and you could choose to filter on the pools. The user that I have doesn't have any pools assigned, so that's why this is disabled. I'm just seeing everyone. And you can see here we have all kinds of capability for sorting. You have your typical filtering capability. But here's a really nice view where you can see those icons, and you can just quickly see at a glance the status of the individual customers. So I can see some customers, pretty bad state. I can also, a little bigger, so you can see all of the aging buckets that are defined for the customers. So it really gives you a great glance at the specific customers as the collection agent starts their day for who they actually want to concentrate or what customer they want to concentrate on for that day. So we're going to take a look here at one of our customers that has some really overdue invoices. We'll take a look at City Manufacturing. And this is the collection detail page. The collection detail page is simply a collection of all kinds of different existing forms or existing reports that already were there in Dynamics AX that we just brought together in a centralized location. As we talked to collection agents, really the biggest pain point that they had was actually getting the data for when they're talking to the customer of understanding, what the state is of specific documents. What have I paid? What have I not paid? And really there was a lot of different windows that our collection agents had to navigate around to. So what we did is we actually brought those together into one location so the collector could try and do most of their work from this window. Of course, there's going to be a few times you may have to jump out to do something, but I think we brought together, I'm trying to remember the number, it was like 31 or 34 different forms together actually into one form where you can see that basic information. Sorry, what was the question? This window is off of, you just start under accounts receivable. The question was, how do you get here? And under the list page for collections, and then you just simply double click on the customer that you're looking for. Sort this here, manufacturing. Okay, so let's just kind of dissect this window a little bit to kind of understand what you're seeing. The middle section you're seeing is just a list of all of the customer's transactions. And you can choose to either show transactions that are only in open state, which means that they haven't been paid, or if you really do need to go back and research something that the customer has already paid, you could even choose to view all open and closed transactions for the customer. Let's just go back and show only open. So we have our transactions in the middle for the customer that's selected up at the top. We also have case capability. It's pretty common where your collection agent, they have that manila folder on their desk and they have all their documentation in that folder, and that's really representative of a case or the specific invoices that they're working with their customer on. So we've actually built in the case management capability in here. So if I'm just talking with this customer about a certain subset of documents, I can go ahead and group those together, and I can say assign to a case. We'll just call this case number 1 for this customer. And all these transactions now are assigned to the case. So when I come in as a collection agent, I could choose to filter on one specific case that I'm working on for that day. You can see here it filtered down my transactions to just those that were assigned. The other thing that we have is the activities at the bottom. So we've also integrated the activity framework that is available in CRM, where you can actually create different activities against the collection process that you're going through. So if you do need to schedule a conference call, or you need to have a reminder where you need to email the customer specific information, you can create additional activities. Let's go ahead and create a task here. Let's just say I need to email. Pretty behind, so we'll just put in our little nasty note just to ourselves, right, that they need to pay now. We'll create the task. And now our task has been created at the bottom. And similar to the transaction information up at the top, you can choose to show open or closed activities. So once you complete the activity, you can go ahead and close it. So if you've completed the email, you're done with that, you can close it, then it will go ahead and be removed from your list. The other thing also we have is the capability, and I don't actually have this set up, but you can choose the origin. So if you do want to also even look at the cases in CRM, you could also choose to view that information. It's kind of common sometimes where you might have a salesperson that's working with this customer on another sale, and you may want to look at some of those activities that are going on, because you may want to inform that salesperson that, hey, you might not want to sell to these people because they're like $1 million over, past due. So it's also kind of nice to have that information where you could navigate back to actually see that in CRM, the activities that are going on there. Across the top and on the side, we have just a lot of additional information. Across the top, we have all kinds of capabilities for managing, so you could choose to close the case. Here's where you can update the aging. If there are some new documents that were coming in and you're working in this window a lot through the day, you can choose to update that. You can go and calculate interest from here. You can go ahead and choose all kinds of different options to view existing journals that were in the system. So again, this kind of gets back to the researching requirement that we heard a lot from the collection agents, which is they want to go back and research what has already happened against these customers. We can go ahead and research and see some of these historical transactions that have occurred. We also have the transactions. So if you want to go and actually see the transactions, this is the same as going to the customer and then clicking on the transaction button, except we have now a quick little link here for you. You can go to the various settlement windows if you want to look at that information. You have all kinds of views. So if you want to view the customer statement and actually send it to Excel, you can do that. The other thing that's pretty common is we hear a lot, well, I want to actually send this information to the customer. On the Communicate tab, again, here's where I could go. I could click on Statements. You can see it just takes me to the exact same window we were in before with that customer, where I could go ahead and choose to generate the statement and send it to them. And of course, now we have the cool email capability, so you're all set, and it will get sent. Let's jump back here. We just have also some additional things around document handling. So if you do need to attach various documents around the collection process, you can do all of that. And then down the side, even more information, address, contact information. Here's where you can actually see the detailed aging for that specific customer that you're looking at. So you don't have to jump back to the previous list page to actually see that detail. It's right here available. And then, of course, there's the credit limit information for the customer. So really, we've just tried to make the life easier for the collection agent by bringing all of this data and information together into one centralized location. Okay, so let's go back here. And we've taken a look at the collections process that was introduced. Just really quick, a recap of when some of this functionality was introduced. Some of the everything you saw today that's not here was introduced in 2012 RTM. So the collections capability, all of the settlement by line, settlement priority, that was all introduced in 2012 RTM. These are the new things, though, that were introduced specifically in CU6. So all of the information around SEPA, so the customer mandates, and the pre-notification for the direct debits on the invoices, that was introduced in CU6. And then in CU7, we introduced the new emailing capability with automatically going to the contacts. And then one other thing which I didn't show is a new feature around the dimensions used specifically for the customer revaluation. The customer revaluation for, of course, you have an accounting entry that gets created for your unrealized gain or loss. The accounts receivable side of that accounting entry always went and pulled the dimensions from the invoice, specifically from the accounts receivable account on the invoice. What we were hearing, though, is customers also wanted the unrealized gain or loss to also pull the dimensions from the invoice, specifically in receivables case from the revenue account, in order to make sure that their costing reports are properly reflecting the unrealized gain or loss also at the dimension level. So that was specifically what we introduced in C7 around customer revaluation, is pulling those dimensions not only for AR, but also for the unrealized gain or loss from the original invoice. Okay, so just a recap, some of the top tips of what we learned today. Some functionality, just a reminder that you saw today, is only available on the free text invoice, specifically the corrections, the recurring capability, the line level settlement, and the accounting distributions and the subledger journal entries. A reminder, if you do want to use the correction capability, that is a configuration key that you need to enable before you actually can use the functionality, only for new documents. We also added the new capability for the correction, the top one was for settlement, sorry, not corrections. Corrections, though, also you do need to enable that through the configuration key. And it will create a copy of the original invoice, and it will create a new credit memo automatically to reverse the original. And then, of course, from there we have, actually, one thing I forgot to show in collections, I can jump back and do that, is we do have write-off capability also in collections, where you can actually choose to write off an entire customer's balance or go down to an individual invoice level and choose to write that off. I'll actually jump back into AX and just show that in a second. And then the last thing was just the at-a-glance icons that really give you the quick overview of the status of the customer by looking at those icons. Let me just jump back, though. I did forget the write-offs. So back here on the collections list page, you do have a write-off option at the top. Keep in mind, if you write it off from the list page, you are writing off the entire customer's balance. If you want to get to an individual document level, you can come into the detail, and you would just choose the document you want to write off. And you also have the write-off capability right here. And if we choose this, you can, of course, define the date that this will occur, the reason code for why you're writing it off, and then click OK. The key thing here is that this creates a general journal. It does not automatically post the write-off transaction because we do want you to have the capability to have some kind of approval process on that write-off. So it will go and actually create a general journal. From there, you can go to the general journal, and the user can approve it. You can choose to lower the amount of the write-off, or you could choose to leave it as it is. You cannot increase the amount, but you can reduce the amount so that you can actually, maybe the collection is say, we're going to write the whole thing off, but, maybe the manager might say, no, let's still try to get, at least $250,000 out of it. So you can reduce that amount. Okay, let's go back to slides here. Okay, so that's the top tips. And from here, I think we've got a few minutes left. Of course, thank you for attending today's session. Please fill out your evaluations, and we got about 5 minutes or so left for questions. If you have any, you can come to the mics or shout it out, and I'll repeat the question. Yep, go ahead to a mic or just shout it out.
I'm brand new to AX, so forgive me if this is already generally known information. But on the free text invoice, the correcting part of it, is there a linkage to the original invoice? How do I know that there was a correcting invoice, a credit memo. Is that all linked?
Sure, great question. So again, sometimes it's hard to even hear at the mics. The question was, is there any type of link between the original invoice that was corrected and the credit memo and the new corrected invoice? Yes, there is. If you go to the free text invoice list page, I'll just show this here, kind of off to the side a little bit. Here you can see they are flagged actually as what the corrected one is, what the original one is, and what the, let's see here, scroll down, the canceling one is. So they are related together with the different states of each one.
Now, will there be like a numbering system? If I had several corrected invoices, how do I know this correction is related to which invoice?
A lot of that, good question. So where can you actually see that link between? Because of course you could have multiple corrections. A lot of that will show in your settlement window because these documents are linked together through the settlement. You can also define your numbering, well, the numbering sequence would be, it would be a little out of order, but through the settlement window would be the primary place to see it.
Okay, and then one last question about the write-off.
Okay.
You said there was a general journal created for the write-off.
Yes.
Is there something in the customer account to show me that there was a write-off?
Sure, yeah, it creates a general journal entry, but it also does, when we say general journal, if you're not familiar with AX, you can actually do customer transactions in the general journal. So I don't know if you noticed when I had that open, let me just go back here. I think I even open on the bottom. Oh. It actually is updating the subledger. So there is a transaction that will be on the customer's account also in accounts receivable. So you don't lose the fact that it was written off. So right here you can see the account type is set to customer. So once I post this, I will actually have a write-off customer transaction on the customer itself also. Question? That's good. Okay. The question is deductions. So you have a group of invoices and they're just randomly taking $500 off of that. Sure. We may need to get into more detail after the session. I guess part of it, though, is a question back to you also, and what is your business process for that? Do you somehow notify the customer that they've underpaid by $500, and is that okay? I think we need to know a little bit more about the business requirements around how you handle that, really, to answer that question. There are some, I'm not sure if there's any sessions here or not, but there is a little bit of functionality, I believe, coming in R3, potentially, around deductions and around royalty type things and deduction workbench where you can actually choose how to handle those deductions. I don't remember if there was a session or not at Convergence on it or not, but that is potentially something coming in R3. So we may want to get a little more information from you and kind of see if that matches up with what you're trying to do. Yes, question? So the question is back to SEPA, how are you defining the customer to be a SEPA customer? It's completely on the fact of the method of payment defaulting onto the invoice being flagged as requiring a mandate and that the customer has a mandate. That's pretty much the only requirement for saying that they'll be using SEPA. And you know, if that same customer chooses to pay another way and not through a direct debit for a specific invoice, you just change the method of payment on that invoice, and then it'll just use whatever other method you typically would use if it's just a check or whatever. Yeah. Sure. Question back.
Yeah, could you please elaborate a little more on the proper management between CRM and collections, promises, conversations you've had about when the person's going to pay? What is your advice about where the appropriate management between those two kinds of information?
Sure. So it's a great question. The relationship, the question is around the relationship with CRM and the collection agents and really around promise to pay. One little thing I did forget to show back in the collections, there's so much in that window, you kind of forget about everything sometimes. Really, I guess the first thing would be that there is probably some kind of activity that's getting created on the CRM side. And again, we have the capability to see that in the collections. So if they do see that information, the collection agent choose to take action on it. And the one thing that we have here is changing the status of the document. So from here, you can actually say, I see that there's an activity in CRM, they've promised to pay, so I could change the status on that specific invoice to promise to pay so that I have that notation on the document. You see here, you can also say it's also in a disputed mode. So if the customer does have some kind of concern and we do need to do a correction on something because maybe the quote isn't matching the final invoice, you also can do that here. But yeah, it's kind of a tricky process, but really we're trying to ease that pain a little bit by really using those activities and using that kind of as the communication channel, I guess you could say, between the two different departments or different parties. Not sure if that answers your question well enough or not. A lot of it is just your business process too. So, any other questions? Okay, if not, we are exactly at lunchtime. Well, thank you again for attending, and please fill out your evaluations. Thank you.